Hello, welcome back in the kitchen. Let's look at the no-knead bread we started earlier. So remember, we did 3 different types. We did 2 of gluten, one made with rye flour, one made with whole grain durum flour, and of course whole grain rye flour. And then we did this one which was made from rice flour, buckwheat flour, and psyllium husk to imitate the gluten. And as I said, none of these have really been, I haven't kneaded them, I just mixed the water and the yeast and salt, and then added the flour and stirred it all together and let it sit on my kitchen counter for 24 hours. You can let it sit a bit longer than 24 hours, but then the breads start getting quite sour, so unless you like really sour, really acidic sourdough bread, 24 hours is probably enough. And as you can see, the dough is actually quite liquid, which it should be, because we're going to bake it at high temperatures. So essentially all I'm going to do is take the dough and scrape it or pour it into baking form. This actually, it smells completely like sourdough bread, although it's not a traditional sourdough, but you still get quite the same effect. Same here. Final one, this one's a bit more solid from the psyllium. So a good old trick, if you're baking, you have to handle dough with your hands. Usually people will dust their hands with flour, but then you'll actually knead all the flour into the bread. So a better idea is just to dip your fingers in cold water, because then they're so slippery that the flour won't stick. So see, when I handle it, it doesn't stick because my fingers are wet. And then we'll put that here in the baking form, or the bread form, and then they will go in the oven. And we need quite high temperatures, so we're going to start out at 250 degrees Celsius, and then we'll turn down the heat a bit. But initially, when you do bread like this, because the dough is so thin and liquid and runny, you have to start at a really high temperature. Now, the fermentation of the flour will not remove gluten completely, by no means, but actually in the 2 gluten-based flours, the fermentation process will remove some of the gluten, some of the zonulin, and some of the other anti-nutrients in there, not all of them. So if you have a real issue with gluten, then, you know, like celiac disease or Hashimoto's that has been induced by cross reactions with gluten, then this is still a no-go. But sometimes you have people who sort of feel, okay, if I eat lots of glutinous grains and, you know, foods made from glutinous grains, I get in trouble, but if I eat it occasionally, or if I stick to rye and some of the older varieties with less gluten, I'm fine. In that case, this would probably work just fine for you. And also some of the phytic acid in the grain or in the flour is broken down from the fermentation process. So some of the others, the phytic acid that will otherwise bind magnesium and zinc and calcium and iron, some of it's broken down, not all of it, but some of it is. And then what you actually get, one of the things you get released when we break down the phytic acid is a nosinol 6-phosphate, which seems to have is beneficial for the immune system. Anyway, let's set the timer, and we'll set it for 15 minutes initially, and then turn down the heat, and then bake the breads for another 10-15 minutes until they're done. Then we'll look at our unstirred or no-knead bread. Tastes really good, I promise you. Bon appetit.